It's 2013. Game of Thrones shocks fans with the Red Wedding. Cronuts are the latest craze and Lord is singing about royals. Off the coast of Monaco, a $250 million superyacht named Equanimity lights up the harbor. On board, a young Malaysian financier named Joe Low is throwing one of his legendary parties. Leonardo DiCaprio, Paris Hilton, Jamie Foxx, and Britney Spears are among the guests. Crystal flows. Fireworks explode in perfect sync with the music. One night alone reportedly cost over $5 million. Just a few years earlier, Joe Low was a relatively unknown Wharton graduate. Now he's living like a modern-day Gatsby. Private jets, a world-class art collection with Picassos and Monets, and close friendships with Hollywood royalty. None of it came from legitimate business. This was money stolen from the people of Malaysia. More than $4.5 billion allegedly siphoned out of the country's sovereign wealth fund, 1MDB, in one of the largest kleptocracy schemes in modern history. Today, we follow the lies from glowing promises of economic transformation to a nation robbed blind. Welcome to Follow the Lies, Fraud and Deceit Uncovered. I'm Kevin Barrows. I'm a former special agent who led two of the largest white-collar investigations in U.S. history. I also co-hosted the Smithsonian Channel docuseries Sports Detectives, where we chased down stolen artifacts. Throughout my career, I've followed money trails that people went to extraordinary lengths to conceal. But cases involving public funds, especially sovereign wealth or development money meant for ordinary citizens, are on an entirely different level. When leaders steal from their own people, particularly in nations still striving to reduce poverty, they're not just taking dollars. They're stealing futures, opportunity, and of course, trust. The 1MDB scandal is one of the most disturbing I've examined because it wasn't the work of a solo operator or a greedy CEO quietly embezzling. This was an alleged multi-year, multi-continent enterprise that reached the highest levels of government and one of the world's most prestigious investment banks. It shows how political power, sophisticated financial engineering, and weak oversight can combine to hollow out public institutions on a massive scale. I've investigated cases where executives stole from shareholders and cases where organized crime skimmed from businesses. But when the victims are entire populations, especially in developing nations trying to climb out of poverty, more than just money is lost. You're not robbing bank accounts. You're robbing generations of opportunity. That's the scale we're talking about in this case. If you're enjoying these deep dives into real cases of fraud and deception, I'd really appreciate it if you'd hit subscribe, leave a rating and review, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. And if you want a practical, field-tested guide to help you spot lies in business deals, investments, or everyday conversations, I created a free resource called 7 Proven Strategies to Spot Lies and Uncover the Truth in Any Interview. You can download it right now at followtheliespodcast.com. No sign-up required. Now let's go back to 2009 in Kuala Lumpur. In July 2009, just months after becoming Prime Minister and Finance Minister, Najib Razak officially launched 1MDB. On paper, it was an ambitious sovereign wealth fund meant to drive Malaysia's economic transformation. A sovereign wealth fund is a state-owned investment vehicle that manages a government's surplus funds, foreign currency, reserves, or revenue. The fund would pursue strategic investments in energy, real estate, tourism, and infrastructure to create jobs, reduce poverty, and position Malaysia as a high-income developed nation by 2020. The vision sounded inspiring and patriotic. Almost immediately, however, the fund took a different path. The fund was given unusually broad powers and minimal oversight, a lethal combination. Najib himself served as both Prime Minister and Finance Minister, effectively controlling the board that was supposed to supervise the fund. This concentration of power would later prove critical. A pivotal figure was Joe Low, then in his late 20s, a charismatic Oxford and Wharton-educated Malaysian with extensive family and political connections, but no official government position. According to investigators, Lowe became the de facto mastermind, using his network of proxies to orchestrate the movement of funds through an elaborate web of offshore shell companies, nominee directors, and accounts in Singapore, Switzerland, the British Virgin Islands, and other secrecy havens. What made Lowe especially dangerous was his ability to operate in the shadows. Despite having no government position, he allegedly had direct access to the highest levels of power. Investigators later discovered he reportedly maintained multiple passports and frequently changed his appearance and travel patterns to avoid detection. Lowe didn't act alone. He allegedly relied on a circle of friends, including family members of powerful politicians, bankers, and fixers across Asia and the Middle East. This informal coalition allowed money to flow with minimal paperwork. In one instance, investigators traced funds moving through accounts linked to relatives of high-ranking officials in Abu Dhabi and Saudi Arabia, turning what should have been a national development fund into an international slush fund. The scheme unfolded in carefully orchestrated phases. The first major transaction occurred in 2009, with a joint venture between 1MDB and Petro Saudi International, a company with ties to Saudi interests. 1MDB committed $1 billion to the partnership. Prosecutors alleged that nearly the entire sum was quickly diverted through shell companies into accounts controlled by Lowe and his associates. Documents were allegedly falsified to create the appearance of legitimate investment returns when, in reality, little to no economic activity took place. According to U.S. court filings, the deal was structured so that $700 million was transferred to a shell company called Good Star Limited, which had no real connection to Petro Saudi. That money allegedly went straight into accounts controlled by Lowe. The investment generated almost no legitimate returns, yet the fund's books were manipulated to show healthy profits. The scale escalated dramatically between 2012 and 2013. Goldman Sachs helped 1MDB raise approximately $6.5 billion through 3 large bond issuances. These deals generated nearly $600 million in fees for the bank, an extraordinarily high percentage. U.S. prosecutors later alleged that more than $4.5 billion of the total funds were misappropriated and laundered through complex layers of transactions involving offshore entities. Money flowed from fund accounts into shell companies, then into personal accounts linked to Lowe, Nahib, family members, and associates. The personal spending was astounding. Lowe allegedly used the diverted funds to finance the $250 million Superyacht, complete with helicopter pad, submarine garage, and lavish interiors. Multiple luxury properties, including a $39 million penthouse in Manhattan, Beverly Hills mansions, and high-end real estate in London and Hong Kong. A world-class art collection featuring works by Claude Monet, Vincent van Gogh, and Pablo Picasso, among many others, some purchased for tens of millions each. Millions in jewelry and gifts, including pieces given to supermodel Miranda Kerr and other celebrities. Extravagant parties across Las Vegas, Saint-Tropez, and New York, often featuring performances by major artists. Financing for Hollywood films through his company Red Granite Pictures, most notably Martin Scorsese's The Wolf of Wall Street. Leonardo DiCaprio even publicly thanked Lowe during a Golden Globe speech. Meanwhile, inside Malaysia, 1MDB was borrowing heavily on international markets, saddling the country with massive debts that carried high interest rates. Yet very little of the promised benefit reached ordinary citizens. Many government projects either never materialized or delivered far less than advertised. The entire operation relied on forged documents, inflated asset valuations, and a network of bankers, lawyers, and intermediaries who either actively participated or looked the other way. By 2014, the fund had accumulated over $11 billion in liabilities, while delivering very few of the promised projects. Independent auditors started raising quiet concerns, but those concerns were allegedly brushed aside or met with political pressure. It was an industrialized system of deception, one that combined political protection at the highest levels with sophisticated financial camouflage that fooled regulators and auditors for years. The first major public cracks appeared in early 2015, when British journalist Claire Rucastle-Brown's investigative outlet, Sarawak Report, published explosive documents showing nearly $700 million had flowed into personal bank accounts linked to Prime Minister Razak. Rucastle-Brown, the sister-in-law of former UK Prime Minister Gordon Brown, became a thorn in the side of the Malaysian government. Her reporting was so explosive that the Malaysian authorities tried to block her website and even issued arrest warrants. But the information kept coming. The story detonated globally. Investigations erupted in Malaysia, the United States, Singapore, Switzerland, the United Kingdom, and beyond. The United States Department of Justice launched one of its largest ever kleptocurrency probes under its Kleptocracy Asset Recovery Initiative. This initiative focused on halting, forfeiting, and repatriating the proceeds of foreign official corruption and returning the stolen funds to help the people harmed. The 1MDB case was described as one of the largest kleptocracy cases in history, involving systemic looting on a nationwide scale. The DOJ filed sweeping civil forfeiture actions seeking over $1 billion in assets purchased with allegedly stolen funds. The complaints read like financial thrillers. They meticulously traced how money was moved through shell companies into personal accounts linked to Lowe and others. One filing detailed how $49 million was used to buy a painting called Dust Heads, which was later seized from a New York storage facility. Another traced funds used to purchase equanimity. FBI agents and federal prosecutors painstakingly traced the money as it moved through the U.S. financial system. Key figures at Goldman Sachs came under intense scrutiny. Tim Leissner, former Southeast Asia chairman, pleaded guilty and cooperated with authorities. Leissner admitted in his guilty plea that he and others at Goldman had helped facilitate the misappropriation of billions from 1MDB. He confessed to paying bribes to Malaysian government officials and concealing the true nature of the bond deals from compliance officers at the bank. Prosecutors alleged that Leissner even received millions in kickbacks for his role in the scheme. Roger Ng, Goldman's former head of investment banking in Malaysia, was convicted in a Brooklyn federal court after an 8-week trial and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Ng's trial was particularly dramatic. Prosecutors presented evidence that he and Leissner had deliberately bypassed Goldman's internal compliance controls. Ng was accused of receiving approximately $35 million in bribes for helping arrange the massive bond deals. His conviction marked one of the most significant victories for the U.S. government in prosecuting senior executives from a Wall Street giant in a foreign bribery case. Goldman Sachs itself paid nearly $2.9 billion in global settlements, one of the largest penalties in the bank's history. In addition to the nearly $3 billion paid to the U.S. Department of Justice, the bank reached separate settlements with regulators in Malaysia, Singapore, and other countries. Internal Goldman emails and messages presented in court revealed that some bankers had referred to the 1MDB deals as money printing machines, while ignoring multiple red flags about the source of the funds. While the bankers faced justice in American courts, the consequences hit home dramatically inside Malaysia. The Malaysian raids were especially dramatic. In coordinated operations, police swept through multiple luxury properties linked to Nahib and his wife, Rosmah Mansor. They uncovered what became known as one of the largest hauls of luxury goods in the country's history. Over 1,400 designer handbags, many Hermes Birkins still in dust bags, 567 luxury watches from Rolex, Richard Mille, and other high-end brands, hundreds of rings, necklaces, earrings, and millions in cash. Photos of tables piled high with jewelry and handbags went viral and became lasting symbols of the scandal for ordinary Malaysians. Rosmah Mansor herself later faced separate charges related to the scandal. The scandal triggered massive street protests in Malaysia. In May 2018, Nahib's long-ruling coalition suffered a shocking electoral defeat after more than 6 decades in power. The new government under Mahathir Mohamad reopened aggressive investigations. Nahib faced dozens of charges across multiple trials for corruption, money laundering, and abuse of power. He was convicted in his first major trial and sentenced to 12 years. Appeals are ongoing. Joe Lowe remains a fugitive, widely believed to be receiving protection in China or elsewhere, despite international arrest warrants. Now let's go inside the investigation to see what was really happening behind the scenes as the prosecution unfolded. This was a case where the evidence became abundant once the scheme was exposed. But having investigated international money laundering cases, I know the real challenge was gathering that evidence. It required analyzing hundreds of bank accounts scattered across the world and extraordinary coordination between multiple countries and agencies. The DOJ can't simply issue domestic subpoenas overseas. They often have to go through the Office of International Affairs and use tools like mutual legal assistance treaties, called MLATs, if they even exist in the country in question, or file former letters rogatory, which are court-to-court requests sent through diplomatic channels. This process is slow, complex, and often extremely frustrating. Fortunately, in the 1MDB investigation, international cooperation was remarkable. Singapore froze accounts worth hundreds of millions. Switzerland and Luxembourg returned significant assets. The FBI collaborated with at least 8 different countries. In total, Malaysian authorities and international partners have recovered or are actively pursuing several $billion. The case became a textbook example of how determined journalism, whistleblowers, and cross-border law enforcement can eventually catch even the most sophisticated kleptocrats. It also exposed serious weaknesses in global banking compliance, weaknesses that allowed billions to flow through some of the world's most respected financial institutions with far too little scrutiny for far too long. The probes revealed not only the scale of the theft, but how allegedly stolen funds helped sustain political power, financing campaigns, buying influence, and silencing critics. By 2018, the human and economic toll had become painfully clear. Malaysia was left carrying enormous debts from the fund, with billions still outstanding years later. The country has recovered significant amounts through international asset seizures and settlements. The U.S. alone has returned well over $1.4 billion. But the full recovery process continues, and the opportunity cost remains enormous. Public money intended for development instead funded a lifestyle of unimaginable excess, while many ordinary Malaysians continued struggling with rising living costs and limited job opportunities. Families who hoped for better schools, health care, and economic mobility saw their government's promises evaporate into yachts, parties, and other luxury purchases. In rural Sabah and Sarawak, promised electrification and water projects were delayed for years, while funds disappeared. One village head later told reporters his community waited over a decade for basic infrastructure that 1MDB was supposed to deliver. Meanwhile, hospitals in some areas lacked essential equipment, and schools operated with outdated facilities. Over the years, Malaysians have described a deep sense of national embarrassment and anger. Parents who struggled to pay for their children's education watched as billions vanished into private art collections. The Goldman Sachs involvement highlighted how even the world's most prestigious financial institutions can become enablers when massive fees are on the line. Internal bank communications later revealed that some employees had raised concerns about the 1MDB deals, but those concerns were allegedly overruled in the pursuit of profit. On the deception spectrum, this case ranks at the extreme high end. It combined high-level political corruption, complex international financial structures, complicit enablers in global banking, and personal greed on an immense scale. The lies were embedded not just in forged documents, but in official government narratives about national progress. The scandal also highlights how persistent investigative journalism and cross-border law enforcement cooperation can eventually pierce even the most sophisticated illegal schemes. Nahib's defeat in 2018 ended more than 60 years of continuous rule by his coalition, a turning point that many Malaysians still call the most important in the country's modern history. Today's lie detector tip is about one of the most dangerous situations in both government and business: lack of separation of duties. When one person or a small group controls both the authorization and the execution of financial decisions, the risk of fraud skyrockets. In the 1MDB scandal, Nahib Razak served as both Prime Minister and Financial Minister. That single point of control gave him unchecked power over a sovereign wealth fund that was supposed to benefit the entire nation. I've seen this pattern repeatedly in the private sector. A bookkeeper should never be the one who both writes the checks and reconciles the bank statements. A CFO should not be the only person approving large wire transfers. When one individual holds too much unchecked control over the money, bad things almost always happen. In one case I investigated after leaving the FBI, a bookkeeper at a small construction company was solely responsible for approving payments, issuing checks, and reconciling the accounts. Over 5 years, She funneled hundreds of thousands of dollars to fake companies owned by her husband and relatives. My rule as an investigator is simple. If someone has the power to both approve and execute a transaction without independent oversight, treat it as a major concern, no matter how trustworthy they seem. Real integrity is built on checks and balances. When you see power highly concentrated over large sums of money, dig deeper. The absence of separation of duties is rarely an accident. From ambitious promises of national development to one of the largest financial heists in modern history, the 1MDB scandal stands as a powerful cautionary tale about what happens when unchecked power meets unchecked greed. Sadly, Malaysia is not alone. We've seen similar looting of sovereign wealth funds in Angola, where the president's daughter allegedly used state oil assets to build a personal empire, and in Libya, where regime insiders treated national oil billions as their private fortune. These cases show a repeating pattern. When political power and financial control are concentrated in too few hands, ordinary citizens always pay the price. If you've ever encountered an investment fund, charity project, or once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that seemed impressive on the surface but felt off underneath, I'd genuinely like to hear about it. Send your story to Kevin at followtheliespodcast.com. It could become the foundation for a future episode. If you want practical tools to better spot deception and protect yourself in business, investments, or personal dealings, download my free guide, 7 Proven Strategies to Spot Lies and Uncover the Truth in Any Interview, at followtheliespodcast.com. While you're there, join our growing community on Substack at followthelies.substack.com for deeper dives, additional case notes, and exclusive lie detector tips you won't hear in the episodes. If you're enjoying this series, please hit subscribe, leave a rating or review, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new one. Thanks for listening. Until next time, follow the lies.